Well, hello and welcome back. The last video, just ignore that. That was like a year and a half ago. This is going to be the first video of this new channel, and hopefully I'll be able to get more regular releases. I'll have more content. Um, Anyhow, let's get to it. So this video, we're going to discuss the origins of slavery, or not necessarily the origins, but the origins of black slavery, along with other aspects of slavery to bring everything to light. Because it seems like whenever they discuss slavery, all they want to do is discuss slavery in America, in the New World, and how evil white people are, without discussing the whole picture. So let's get started on that. First off, the initial black slaves that were sold to the Europeans came from other tribes that had fought and conquered other African tribes. They then enslaved them, and then the white Europeans showed up and they wanted to trade with them, so they traded the slaves. The Europeans were interested in that, so they went ahead and traded with them, and that's how the trade began in black slavery. Eventually, the Europeans did end up moving into those countries and pretty much taking them over, colonizing them, and rounding up their own slaves. They even were rounding up some of the tribes who initially had sold them slaves and enslaving them. I mean, in a way, that's kind of poetic justice if you think about it. And then brought them, of course, as we know, over to the Americas. But they weren't the only ones that were taking African slaves. The Arabs were taking African slaves as well. The difference is, when the Arabs took the African slaves, they castrated the men. That way they couldn't breed. That's why you don't see Africans in Saudi Arabia, in their world, because they castrated them. They made sure they couldn't breed. It's that simple. I mean, the white people didn't do that. The white people that brought them over, the Europeans, they kept them as is and bred their children in slavery. And I'm not saying that was any better. That's really horrible, but at least they weren't mutilating these men. But like I said, the Arabs did as well. Now, we like to also pretend like, the Irish were never enslaved. There was no such thing as white slavery, and that Irish slavery didn't exist. It was just indentured servitude. For one, indentured servitude is just another form of slavery. That's cut and dry. That's what it is. Those guys were brought over, men and women, and sometimes they spent the rest of their lives in slavery. Any children that were born into it regardless, and they might be able to purchase their freedom. They might not. They might end up dying as slaves. But also, there was more than that. See, the English did not like the Irish at all. They thought they were a subhuman race. Kind of like how Japan looked at China during World War II. They looked down on them like they were subhuman. They didn't exist, that they were better than everybody else. The English did the same towards the Irish. When the Irish would rebel, they'd fight them. They'd send their armies over there to fight them. And what would they end up doing? They'd capture all those warriors, those people rebelling against them. They'd round them all up. They'd send them to the New World as slaves. Send them out to their colonies as slaves. They had no value. The black slaves had value. They were property. They cost money. They had value. The Irish did not have value. They were given pretty much for free to the colonials. So the Irish were worked to death. They were given all the most horrible jobs, the hardest stuff, and they were worked to death because they were not worth anything. So why not just use them up? to do the stuff that you don't want your black slaves that are worth money to do. And so that's what they did. And they did for hundreds of years. They enslaved the Irish. They took their land, forced them out of their religion, the rape, murder, you name it. The English were horrible to the Irish, way, way more horrible than people like to admit. But we just seem to sweep this under the rug. This woke society just doesn't want to admit that Irish slavery ever took place. They want you to believe that it was all about the black slaves and that's the only thing that's important. White people, all white people are evil. It wasn't all white people that were doing this. So, as a matter of fact, it is a historical fact that my family were abolitionists. This can be researched and Googled very easily, pulled up. My family were abolitionists, and they were what was considered stockholders for the Underground Railroad. Now, if you're not familiar with that, there's a lot of different terms for people who had different roles to play in the Underground Railroad. Like the guy whose house that they would hide him, he might be called the conductor. The guy who guided them through the tunnels might be called an engineer. There's different terms. For a stockholder, what that meant was if you were a stockholder on the Underground Railroad, you were providing money or goods, supplies, and everything to the Underground Railroad. So in the historic records, my family were stockholders and they supplied money. So we come to the whole point of needing reparations. Well, why should we pay reparations to people who were not alive to be enslaved, and none of us are alive that enslaved them? This happened a long time ago. I mean, some of their ancestors, some of the black folks' ancestors have been here longer than my ancestors have been here. How could we have had any part in it? You know, I don't understand it, and I don't agree with it. 100% do not agree with it. Continuing on the whole topic, though, during that time and after, in fact, after the American Civil War, this was still going on, the Turkish slavers were raiding and wiping out whole villages in Europe on the coast. Enslaving them, white Europeans. They were enslaving them. They even made it all the way up to Iceland and were taking slaves from Iceland and bringing them all the way back down into Turkey as slaves. Turkey's, for hundreds of years, it's documented they would take slaves, largely Christian slaves, and they would make them their janissaries, their troops. And they ended up being some of the best troops, but they were initially slaves from Europe. So they were initially white slaves. I mean, this happened. This isn't, and it continued, I think, until, I don't know, like around 1900, because the Ottoman Empire didn't fall until World War One. So I believe, if I'm correct, it continued on until right at the beginning of the 20th century, well after slavery in America had been abolished. The Mongols did the same thing. They enslaved peoples. They enslaved the Chinese when they conquered them, the ones that they didn't kill. They made them slaves. They made other people slaves as they expanded their empire. Everybody has done it. In South America, there's many different tribes in South America, but the most famous and most well documented of doing it were the Aztecs. The Aztecs would enslave the other tribes, and then they would sacrifice them, murder them. I mean, just rip their hearts out, cut their heads off, and use them as slaves. Before they did that, and that was other tribes would be like, I don't know if it was the Mayans, but famously we believe that it was Mayans. And then you have here in America, before Europeans came, the native tribes here. They enslaved people when they enslaved other tribes. they'd fight over resources and enslave them. My grandfather told me a story from World War II that we don't really see in movies and books, which is a shame because I think some of the things that really happened that aren't in the movies should be, because they're very interesting. But he said that they would have the Indians put on all their war paint and their gear and everything, and they would dance around a bonfire at night, which, of course, was taboo. You don't have a bonfire at night because then the enemy can see you. But they did it, and they did it on purpose, so the Germans could see the Indians dancing around the fire. Because at that time, all the Germans knew about the American Indian was what they'd read in books and seen in movies, which meant that they thought the Indians were going to torture them and scalp them. That's how they believed. So my grandfather told me that whenever they did this, the next day, because they knew the German line was right there, the next day the Germans would be gone or they would surrender, because they believed that they were going to be tortured and scalped because the Indians were there. I mean, that's crazy when you think about it nowadays, but back then, that's all people knew, and that's what they thought. And the Indians had a reputation. I mean, they did take slaves. So it's been everybody. Every culture around the world has done this. It's not just Europeans. It's not just white people. Stop blaming white people for everything. We're not the root of all the world's problems. We didn't start all this. It's been going on for years. If we're going to get into reparations, well, how far back are we going to go then? When's it going to stop? I mean, that would open the door for other things. A lot of my ancestors came from Gaul and Ireland, the British Isles, all the way up, Scotland and everything. The Romans came in, invaded. They took prisoners. They killed and murdered millions of people, enslaved tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands more people. So should we not be asking Italy to pay all of us from that part of Europe reparations for what the Roman Empire did? Because they are essentially Italians, the Italian ancestors. So shouldn't they have to pay reparations? Doesn't that sound fair? I mean, if we're going to go back in time of history where nobody existed to experience any of this, then we might as well just keep going back. I don't see how that's not fair. The Romans even made it and did it to Germans. They didn't get all the way in and completely conquer them, but they sure enough did invade. And the largest majority ethnic makeup in America is a German ethnicity. So we should all sue Italy for reparations for what happened. I know some smartass is going to put up here about Nazi Germany and suing all of us, but we weren't there. We were already Americans by then, so that doesn't work. Sorry about your luck. You could probably find other things. I don't know, but again, we're Americans now. You have to go after Germans because we're a mix. We're not the pure blood. So all I'm saying is, you need to stop and think. This whole wokeness, this woke society that's been going around is destroying history and changing history to suit their own agendas. It's stupid, it's crazy, and we need to do something about it. We need to stop. So I hope I gave a little bit of facts about the origin of slavery. I could care less whether you believe me or not. If you don't, then go Google it. Do your research. Don't just Google one thing that fits with your narrative. Look at many different things and understand the truth. Anyhow, this is simply about what the channel is going to be about. Not all about slavery, obviously, but different topics. Different topics through history, religion, current politics, current world events, different things. I thought I'd start this off with this video, and we'll move from here, because it's getting close to the time of elections. I'll probably be doing some political stuff here really soon once I get my thoughts gathered on everything that's going on. But y'all take care. Be safe. Peace.